Okay, let's begin this review. I want to go over the goals first with you. The goals included discuss what life would be like without government, recognize the purpose and need for government, identify the 5 basic concepts of democracy, and then be able to explain those 5 basic concepts of democracy, to examine your role as a citizen, explain the free enterprise system, define the law of supply and demand, and to make the connections between capitalism and democracy. All right, so I'm going to begin with talking to you about the web we created with regards to the 5 concepts of democracy. I've already got them up there for you. They are compromise, equity, individual worth, individual freedom, and majority rule and minority rights. Now, I asked you to explain those, and if you need to, I gave you a packet that went over these. Please review that packet because that's important. Of course, briefly I'll go over them. Compromise, of course, is the willingness to be able to come to some sort of compromise where views are accepted, some are kept, some aren't, in order to be able to continue to govern. So that's creating a compromise. Equality, of course, means equality for all, and then individual worth means that respect of the individual and their worth to society. Individual freedom, of course, means that each individual has freedoms, and they are, of course, to be protected by your government. And finally, majority rule, minority rights. Majority rule, of course, is the idea that in any kind of election or just the opportunity to speak your voice, the majority generally is the rule. However, the majority rule should be respectful of minority rights. All right, moving on to the next slide. We have here a discussion that we had at what does democracy demand of you. We came up with these: obey laws, go to school, go to work, do the duty as a citizen, pay taxes. All of those, of course, are things that democracy asks or demand of you. That's the kind of question that I would ask. It's an opinion question, but I do expect you to have thoughtful answers in the test, and based on the facts that you've learned in this class. All right, then we're coming on to the idea of a citizen. A citizen is one who holds both rights and responsibilities in a state. That is the expectation of who you are. You can define that in a much broader way, but that is, to put simply, a definition of citizen. The question I asked underneath here is, do you understand and are you committed to honoring the basic concepts of American democracy? I may not ask that specific question, but I'm probably going to ask you a question about the idea of a citizen and what that might mean to you. All right, let's go to the next slide. This next slide focuses on free enterprise system, also known as capitalism, and this is an economic system. And I've put up here 3 characterizations of the free enterprise system. And these are important. I will be asking you questions on this. So, first of all, private ownership, meaning as a person, you as an individual can own businesses, your property, just about anything. You can own it privately. The government cannot take away your right to ownership of some sort. Also, it is characterized by investments made by private decision, and that means investments like in the stock market, investment in any number of different enterprises. It could be going into partnership with someone. It could be giving somebody money to get a business started. In other words, the government is not allowed to give you a directive on how you use your money to invest in businesses or whatever you might be interested in placing your money. Finally, the third characterization is success or failure determined by competition in a marketplace. And what that simply means is the government is not supposed to interfere. Competition is how businesses succeed or fail. And so that is an important issue in the free enterprise system, that competition has to exist. And certainly we have that competition here in the United States. Now, the four factors that is important to a free enterprise system is this. Again, this private ownership. It's part of the characterization, but it's also a factor in in how this all works. You also need individual initiative, meaning that the individual, not the government, is out there making decisions on how to encourage the economy, how to purchase whatever it is that you want to purchase. It includes, then it also then is the prize, I guess, if you want to say, in this is then the profit, the money that you make off of this. And competition plays into that profit as well. It is the competition spurs on making things better, getting things out there for the consumers to purchase. So all those factors play a major role in the economic, in our economic system, of course, which is capitalism. All right, define capitalism just a little bit better or differently maybe. It's important to know that capitalism does not rely on government. And I gave you three things in particular that the government is not supposed to be involved in. It can't decide what items will be produced. It is not supposed to be talking about how much should be produced. And certainly it is to stay out of the idea of how much any item is to sell for. So those are the things that capitalism is about, and that the government is not allowed or supposed to not be involved in. Okay, so then as a part of that, if government doesn't make these decisions, then who does make these decisions? Well, it's the consumer, as you see right here. And they do so through the unwritten law of supply and demand in the marketplace. And right below here is the quote that I've used that pretty much defines the idea of supply and demand. When supplies of goods and services become plentiful, prices tend to drop. They're out there, they're not scarce, and so and there's competition, so prices tend to drop. When, on the other hand, supplies become scarce, prices will very likely rise, meaning there probably is less competition in the marketplace. There's less available supplies, meaning then in order to produce that, it's more costly, and the prices will rise. All right, so that is the unwritten law of supply and demand. Now, the next thing I want you to pay attention to, or at least consider, is what is the connection between democracy and the free enterprise system. You ought to be looking back at this. The fundamental word here is to remember is free enterprise system. So the word free, that word right there should indicate that the very fact that in a democracy you have freedoms to purchase what you want. You have freedoms to decide if you don't want to purchase something. In other words, your use of your money is your choice. Now, there are some limitations because of taxes and a few other things, but ultimately, you make the decision as to how you use your money. Right. That's the first part of this review. The second part of the review looks like this. All right. Again, I've given some targets here for us to take a look at. They are identify and characterize the three concepts of government. Now remember, this is different than the 5 concepts of democracy. This is a broader idea of the 3 concepts of government that will influence our American colonies. We're going to identify the ideas that provided the origins of many of the ideas in the Declaration of Independence. And I'll tell you right now, we have not talked about the Constitution or Bill of Rights, so that will not be anything that I test on. But I will be talking to you about the Declaration. The next is explain how Britain's colonial policies contributed to the growth of self-government in the colonies. Identify the major steps that led to growing feelings of colonial unity. And finally, we're going to make some real-world connections to then the American colonies and the Revolution and now. All right, so let's get started on that. The first thing I want you to remember are the basic concepts of government. And of course, we talked about this when we did our activity on the deep impact. And we came up with these three. They're very much at the heart of most every government, certainly a democracy. But this is, first of all, order. People want order to live by. They also want, number two, representation in their government. They want their voice heard. And finally, number three, they also want a limited government. Most people, especially in our country, do not want the government so involved in their lives that the government is making all the decisions. So they want that government limited in any number of ways. We'll look at that more as we get into the Constitution and those things, and of course that's the next unit. All right, so let's go and look at how this all plays out. First of all, we have government here in the middle of the web. We've identified three things: limited, representative, and ordered. But let's get this, let's kind of break this down just a little bit more for our purposes. When we're looking at limited, you need to know that that means it's not all powerful. It is not a government that makes all the decisions in every way. We talked a little bit about our economic system and all the different things that the government is not supposed to do within our economic system, meaning it is not all powerful. Then we have limited in that it has to respect individual rights. The individual plays an important role in the government, and it should be addressed. They cannot ignore these individual rights. All right, so let's just keep going around the circle here. We're looking down now at representative. Representative also means that it's going to serve the people. The people's voice, it needs to be heard. And as the representative to the government, they are to be aware of what the people they represent, what they feel, what their concerns are, and they should be considering them whenever they make decisions as part of the government. The next one, of course, is people are to have a voice, and that just plays a role right into what I've just said. They need to be able to be heard. And in any government, there should be that opportunity for people to be heard, whether it's through a representative, but also through the opportunity to be able to express it as an individual to the government as a whole. We do that through media. We do that through being able to go to our representative and speak personally. We even have that opportunity, although limited, to go right to the heart of government in Washington, D.C. and speak to the Congress and maybe even the President. All right, so let's move on to ordered. Now, this is the idea here, and I wrote down regulate relationships. Excuse me, sorry. Regulate relationships. That means that the government is responsible to make sure that the different agencies, the different the countries, the different ways that people interact with each other, it can't be just everybody going crazy. There has to be some sort of regulated way of doing things within the government. For example, simply put, there is in our government, we have states. So we've broken down into 50 states. We break down again into communities and break down into counties, and so then within those we have different ways to do things, and so they are regulated and ordered by their government. Then these are based often, or most likely based on the way we were governed, our former type of government. For us, that's an English origin, and those English origins, or the way of doing business or the way of doing government, we often follow or use a lot of the same things they gave to us originally. All right, so those are the three concepts of government, and then broken into some additional information to explain those three concepts. So we're going to move on then and and what we're going to be talking about is the 13 colonies and establishing how we came to be. What happened in order for us to finally make that choice to revolt against England and become or begin to form a new type of government. So I did this very quickly, a brief history, and I'm just going to read through these quickly, maybe comment, but remember this because this is stuff I will test on. Each colony was formed separately and with a different goal in mind. And I noted then that the differences for our purposes are of little importance here. What is significant is the fact that we were shaped by our English origins, meaning that the government in many ways looks very similar to the English government. The difference was the idea of removing a monarchy and then giving a greater voice to the people. We'll look at that when we spend time in the Constitution. Number three, at that time of the original colonies, the Crown did retain a certain amount of power, and most all people saw themselves as British citizens. This is important because this is at the heart of why we will become so angry as to revolt against the Crown. We believed ourselves to be loyal to the Crown, and then because of that, we had all the rights of those who lived in England. Now, at first, the Crown mostly left the colonies alone to shape ourselves, which leads us right to number 5. Colonies became used to a large measure of self-government, which meant we did most of the work. We did not count on the Crown to send us directives or how we were supposed to do things. We pretty much took care of it ourselves. And with that, then, as the colonies grew, they became extremely prosperous, meaning wealthy. The colonies themselves were wealthy, although I don't want to give you the false impression that there weren't poor people here. There were. But the colonies themselves were very prosperous or rich. Now, with that, why did we revolt? Well, the big thing, of course, was the French and Indian War. French and Indian War was extremely costly because not only was there a war going on here in this nation, but there was also a war going on in Europe. And England, of course, was right in the middle of both of those wars. When the wars ended, England found themselves basically bankrupt. And so they looked around for where they could add income. And of course they saw us. Remember I said we were a very prosperous colonies. And so they began to take a greater interest then in governing as well as looking for added income. They started to address trade acts. Many of them had already existed. Unfortunately, nobody had really done anything about enforcing them. So they began to enforce them. They became very restrictive, and for a colony that had pretty much been able to make their own decisions and pretty much ran themselves, suddenly having the Crown looking over their shoulders, insisting on all these additional rules and regulations, began to really chafe at the colonists. Britain then imposes new taxes to support the British troops in North America. And for the colonists, again, believing themselves to be Englishmen, they saw their rights were pretty much being ignored because there was no one in the Parliament that represented the colonists. They had no voice. And remember, when we're looking at government, refer back to that, the idea of government, there needed to be representation. And for the colonists, they saw no representation. So thus came this slogan, no taxation without representation. All right, so revolution. Now, revolution didn't grow just out of nowhere. It came as a result of a lot of people thinking about the idea of government. And because of that, this comes from this target here, the Age of Enlightenment had been going on for a while in Europe. Their ideas came to this country. If you remember, I gave you a paper on this. It talked about Hobbes, Locke, Montesquieu, Voltaire, Diderot, Rousseau, and Smith. Now, If you do not have this paper, look at this. You can move back and forth through this. You can stop the recording and pay attention and review this information for yourself. All right, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time going over it other than the fact that these ideas were extremely important. I'm going to point out Locke here. Locke had a major influence on Jefferson and what happened with the Revolution. Of course, this idea of natural rights, life, liberty, and property is something that the Americans recognize as that being something you're born with, and they do not get easily taken away. And if a government does not protect those natural rights, then the people have the right to overthrow. And of course, from that idea was born the idea of the Declaration of Independence and Revolution. All right, so I'm going to go back here. All right, I asked you in an assignment to take the Declaration and identify the most important statement. Several of you identified several. I'm probably going to ask this question on the test, although I don't expect for you to be able to write it out perfectly, but you should be able to give me an idea of what you saw as the most important statement. Now, I'm not looking for one in particular. I'm looking for the one you believe is the most important, and of course, like I ask in any test, I'm going to ask you to explain to me why you believe that to be an important statement. All right. Now, I do want you to understand, I'm going to go back here. Hang on, let me get to the right spot. Okay, here's the targets. I do want you to be able to talk about the relationship between the Enlightenment thinkers. I'm going to ask you questions about the Enlightenment thinkers. What I will not do is I will not ask you to tell me what Diderot said. What I will do is I will look at Diderot. In fact, let me go right there to help you out here. Let's look at Diderot. All right, for example, I will ask you, there was something like this. I will say there were an encyclopedia of Enlightenment thinkers. They denounced, or they urged for all people what? What was it that they denounced? Felt strongly should no longer exist. What type of freedoms will they encourage? And so on. For example, Rousseau, I'll say something like this. Rousseau believed governments that were able to impose control should only be those that were what? Freely elected. And so look at these so that you are able to identify and explain or identify the important parts of this to if I ask questions about them. And I will. I shouldn't say if. I will be asking questions about this. All right. I hope this gives you some information on how to prepare for the test. Plan for the test. If you're an Orange Day, plan for the test on Wednesday. If you are a Brown Day, plan for the test on Tuesday. All right. If you have any questions, have them prepared to ask me when I get back on Tuesday. I will give some time before each test, whether it's on Brown or Orange Day, for you to ask questions, review some of the stuff with me. That is something I always will do before a test. So please have that in mind and then be prepared to take the test on those days. Thank you.